conclusion that the space is bigger by putting small-sized furniture on the plans, which...
Because you wouldn't know, right?
Well,
I mean, unless you're an architect and they've drawn a bath at 75 centimetres instead of 1.25.
Exactly.
That's misleading. That's wrong.
I know, but we're in a hurry to put up a lot of buildings. We need to house a lot of people.
My father-in-law's an architectural designer. He's got a little ruler which has got the beds and the fridge and everything. So they must sell a little 3/4 size ruler for these new architects that want to squeeze more in. Yeah. Does it depress you driving around Auckland, John, and seeing these apartment monstrosities?
Well, it does. If I look along Hobson Street, whatever the street, I can't remember. Nelson. I mean, we've built the slums of the future. And I think we've done it down on the waterfront at the bottom of Anzac Avenue. I mean, I just think it's appalling to look at the buildings that have gone up there. And, we should have been more rigorous about all that. We could have had a good-looking city. And these will be slums. I mean, the units that are inside them are tiny. And, there's no ownership of them by people.
25-metre long corridors with no windows, says this guy, the architectural walls. Aesthetics are not covered by any law at the moment, says one person on text. Is that true?
No. Yeah, it is. The only place that you will see that a little more able to be considered is we've got these areas in Christchurch that were called special amenity areas, SAMs. They've now been renamed. So where there's an historical feel, if you like, with an environment and the position of a garage on a street, and you've got to, within reason, still try and keep that kind of vibe, if you like. But no, that person's absolutely right. That's part of the problem.
Well, what part do apartments play in Christchurch, by the way, Ellie?
Well, you can't build up too high, Jesse. That's unless you've got pre-existing rights where a building was, 10, 11 stories before, and you're bulldozing it and building again. Generally, you can't really go any higher than 3 stories in
since the earthquake.
City. That's right.
Right.
And there are some buildings that are a bit taller than that, and there will be exceptions given, but generally they are very low level.
Eddie heard you talking about the social element of running, and he sent me a text and says, my dog and I walk in the same park at around the same time every day. We've met a lot of dogs and their owners, and now we even have our own Facebook group, and we had a barbecue at a standard schnauzer's house in February.
That's gorgeous.
It's the best time of my day every day. I wonder if that's a common thing for a dog walking to lead to friendships.
Do they have a Tinder app of some kind, to meet each other?
Do they look like their dogs? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it brings me on to our final story, which is that new scientific research shows people who own dogs are so in sync with their animals that their heart rates match. Monitors were used to measure heart rates on both people and pooches, which showed that when they were together, the rate was slower. And while the heartbeats of humans and dogs are different, the times their increased or decreased actually matched when owners and their 4-legged friends were together. There's also evidence showing that people who have had heart attacks recover more quickly if they have a dog. Does this surprise you, John?
No, it doesn't. But isn't that a lovely story?
Yeah, it is sweet, isn't it? You've had a dog?
I've not owned a dog, but I've had... Yeah.
Is this time for you to get a dog now, Ellie, now that you've got some more time on your hands?
Are you like a fly on my wall? We are getting a dog in 9 days.
Are you?
And his name is Dexter, and he is a smooth-coated fox terrier, and comes from a lovely, lovely breeder just outside Christchurch, and we've visited and seen the parents. And I'm a bit worried about that heart thing, because little Dexter's heart rate, because he's such a, he's a puppy at the moment, it just goes like as you said earlier, like the clappers. So I'm hoping that he will calm down a bit and it won't be me who ends up having a coronary. So yes, Dexter will be arriving in the next 8 days.
Oh, pleased to hear it. And we can't wait next time you're on the panel to find out how the friendship is burgeoning.
Yes, and what other smooth-coated fox terriers we've met.
Indeed. Yes. Ellie Jones, great to talk to you in Christchurch today.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you.
John Barnett, thanks for coming in. Nice to see you. Get well soon.
Thank you.
And that is the panel. Hope you have a neat weekend. Jim will be back on Monday, and I'll be back in my usual hours, 1 to 4 p.m.
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell. On behalf of the Checkpoint team, thank you for joining us. Tonight, EQC and what it's been saying over the past 24 hours or so. We have EQC documents that suggest that's materially different from what they were saying between 2011 and 2014. What standard were they rebuilding and repairing to? And what do Christchurch homeowners think about suggestions it was to, as, when, new? This is a big story. Also tonight, the food protest outside Dunedin Hospital. We were there, hundreds of people were there in pretty dreadful weather. And among them was Tim Shadbolt up from Invercargill, the Warriors losing on the field and trouble off it. And an immunotherapy treatment gets the tick-off that may lead to it being used more widely in the battle against secondary skin cancer. All of that and more coming up. But first, here's Katrina Batten with RNZ News.
Kia ora, good evening. The Overseas Investment Office is investigating after revelations two Argentine brothers the office allowed to buy a large Taranaki farm have criminal convictions for environmental pollution. The Labour Party says documents it's obtained, as well as media reports, show Rafael and Federico Grozowski, who bought Onatai Station in 2014, were found criminally responsible for chemical dumping from their Buenos Aires tannery. Ruth Hill reports.
The pair are linked with the Panamanian law firm Mossack Fonseca, which is at the centre of the Panama Papers revelations about how the rich hide their wealth in overseas trusts. The OAO has previously said it was satisfied due process was followed when it granted consent for the brothers to buy the 1,300-hectare farm near Awakino in 2014. But in a statement issued in the past hour, it says it is now investigating the serious issues raised in media reports. This is Ruth Hill.
The Earthquake Commission is being challenged on its insistence it always repaired earthquake damage to an as-when-new standard. It announced yesterday a settlement with a group of 98 Canterbury homeowners who'd taken legal action. At issue was a dispute over whether earthquake damage was repaired to a pre-quake condition or as when new. In an interview with Checkpoint's John Campbell yesterday after the settlement, the Commission insisted it repaired to the highest standard whenever possible. But RNZ has obtained internal EQC papers that show pre-quake was repeatedly cited as the standard, and a number of homeowners say they were told they were entitled only to the lower and cheaper pre-quake standard rebuild. The Commerce Commission says it's found no evidence of petrol price fixing in its 10-month-long investigation of the market. The Commission says it's had an in-depth look at competition in the lead-up to its decision to give the fuel retailer Z Energy permission to take over its rival Caltex. Apart from asking Z to sell 19 service stations and a truck stop, it's imposed no other conditions, even though one of the commissioners raised concerns the takeover would reduce price competition. The Commission's chair, Mark Berry, says there's no evidence to suggest there's been any collusion in the market, which would be an illegal activity.
And we've undertaken extensive analysis of this merger, and there is no evidence that we have from that that would support or justify us engaging in that kind of investigation.
Commerce Commission Chair Mark Berry. In Australia, the maker of Nurofen, Rickert Benkaiser, has been fined $1.7 million for breaching consumer laws. The Competition and Consumer Commission had asked the federal court to impose a fine of $6 million. The court has earlier found the range of so-called pain-specific Nurofen products all contained the same active ingredient and did the same thing. Rickert Benkaiser promised to relieve either back pain, period pain, tension, headache or migraine, depending on the product, even though it's not possible to target pain relief in such a manner. Protesters outside Dunedin Hospital have been calling for the cancellation of a firm's 15-year contract to supply meals to patients after a chorus of complaints about the quality of the food. Meals for Dunedin and Invercargill hospitals are now largely prepared in the North Island and shipped south under a new contract with Compass. Peter Newport reports.
Images on social media have drawn increasing public attention to the quality and appearance of hospital meals being served by Compass since they took over the Southern DHB meals contract last October. Today's large and noisy protest, which temporarily brought traffic to a standstill outside Dunedin Hospital, called for the Compass contract to be cancelled. The protesters want a return to hospital meals being prepared on site instead of being freighted in from the North Island. An online petition is to be launched, and the organisers say they believe the contract can be terminated on the grounds the company is not delivering quality hospital meals, a claim which Compass rejects. This is Peter Newport.
Fog has disrupted flights throughout the day for people travelling to and from Christchurch. Heavy fog blanketed most of the city this morning, affecting many domestic flights. This afternoon, planes continue to be delayed or cancelled, and several international flights have also been affected. The airport remains open and passengers are being advised to contact their airline. To sport, and a night out after their biggest loss of the season has cost 6 Warriors their place in the side for Sunday's NRL game against St George Illawarra. An investigation into a breach of team protocol has led to Manavatavai, Ben Matulino, Bodine Thompson, Albert Vete, Sam Lasoni and Conrad Hurrell being dropped for the Dragons clash. RNZ understands the group went out drinking the night after Monday's 42-0 loss to Melbourne. The Warriors General Manager Jim Doyle says he's disappointed players aren't meeting the professional standards expected, but he wouldn't comment on what the players were doing. The Chief Executive of New Zealand Rugby, Steve Tew, is adamant All Blacks management played no part in Hurricanes flanker Ardie Savea's decision to pull out of Olympic contention. Savea withdrew from the men's 7 side on Sunday, saying he wanted to concentrate on Super Rugby and a place in the All Blacks. There have been suggestions the All Blacks may have shoulder-tapped Savea, but Tew says none of the All Blacks management have influenced Savea's decision.
It's also incorrect, and it is also unfair to say that the All Blacks themselves have impacted this decision. But I know for a fact that there has been no direct contact from the All Black coaches or selectors to Ardie Savea.
Steve Tew says NZ Rugby can't force players to make themselves available for Rio. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, the story that didn't make it last night. Trouble at the Bolshoi Ballet. Nick Reed talks about his documentary on ructions within Russia's premier theatre company that culminated in an acid attack. There's a bit of Shakespeare set to music. George Kay concludes his series on the late David Bowie, and there's a sonic tonic dedicated to murder on Nights Still Getting Away With It, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland and Auckland, a few showers tomorrow, clearing south of Orewa in the afternoon. Waikato to Kapiti, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Areas of cloud, especially in the west, a few showers about Coromandel tomorrow evening. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Wellington, mostly cloudy tomorrow with a few showers developing in Hawke's Bay and Gisborne from late morning. Nelson and Marlborough fine. Bulla and Westland, cloudy periods, a few showers developing in Westland this afternoon and spreading to Bulla overnight. Fiordland, rain at times, possibly heavy and thundery today. Canterbury, a few showers developing this evening, clearing tomorrow morning and then fine spells developing. Otago and Southland, fine spells tomorrow, but a few spots of rain possible in the evening. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with a few showers this evening and tomorrow morning. It's 5:08.
Thanks, Katrina. We've got a story about the weather coming up. It's been absolutely glorious in Wellington, we're told by our colleagues down there, and we're going to look at the impact of very low rainfall on farms. That's all coming up before 6 o'clock, but we begin tonight with EQC and with a furious response to their claim they have always rebuilt to an as-when-new standard. Yesterday, a joint statement from EQC and 98 Canterbury homeowners who've taken action against them affirmed EQC's position that it will reinstate earthquake damage in homes to as when new. Now, this is important, and the homeowners hailed it as a landmark settlement, but EQC rejected that, insisting it simply reaffirmed what they'd always been doing. Now, in the 24 hours since Checkpoint broadcast an interview with EQC's acting CEO saying exactly that, we have been inundated with correspondence from homeowners saying EQC and its contractors explicitly told them they would not get as when new work. They would not get it, but would instead get their damage repaired to a lower pre-earthquake condition. We'll hear from some of those homeowners next, and some of them are very angry indeed. But Checkpoint has also obtained internal EQC documents that refer to pre-earthquake standard repairs, not as when new. This is EQC in their own words. And these documents, at least the ones we're referring to tonight, are all public statements, and they appear to directly contradict EQC's position in the past 2 days. Last night we began our interview with Brian Dunn, the acting head of EQC, by asking him what we know now as a result of their joint statement reaffirming EQC's position that it will reinstate earthquake damage to an as-when-new condition. This was Brian Dunn's reply.
What we know now is that the approach that EQC's taken from day one is the right approach.
The right approach, as agreed by EQC in the joint statement it issued with the group that had spent $300,000 in legal fees to get EQC to that point, was as when new. Now, last night on Checkpoint, EQC insisted that had always been their approach. So, in short, every time an EQC assessor has gone out, they have been determined to act under the prescriptions of the Act, which is, verbatim quote, as when new.
My view is our staff has always attempted, in good faith, to ensure that our customers get what they're entitled to, no more and no less.
And as the joint statement said, that was as when new. Again, I asked Brian Dunn if there was agreed earthquake damage, then you would return it to an as when new.
That's correct.
This morning, in response to that interview, Checkpoint received a large amount of internal EQC material directly contradicting such assertions. This material explicitly reveals that EQC itself frequently replaced the requirement under the Act, as when new, with a much lower and therefore cheaper standard. The phrase they used was pre-earthquake state. Checkpoint now has extensive evidence that EQC used that measure repeatedly. Perhaps the most striking example is an EQC newsletter from August 2011, that's 6 months after the February quake. Called EQC Connects, it extensively quotes Reid Stuyven, who was then EQC's Canterbury event manager, and it contains an absolutely explicit statement.
Central to this process is that repairs will be to a home's pre-quake condition only.
In the context of EQC's repeated insistence in the past 24 hours that they were working to an as-when-new standard, it's worth repeating their own words from 2011.
Central to this process is that repairs will be to a home's pre-quake condition only.
2 months later, another EQC Connects. And remember, this is an EQC document. It contains another explicit statement, this time a quote from Fletcher EQR, explaining the standards Fletchers believed they were working to. Fletchers, it said, were working with building contractors, quote,
to return all the relevant properties to their pre-earthquake condition.
Note the phrase pre-earthquake condition. Again, that's a lower and cheaper standard than the one EQC claims it was working to, as when new. And there's more. One of the most important documents available to homeowners in Christchurch was a large guide issued by the Canterbury Home Repairs Program, EQC's managed repair program for homes with damage between $15,000 and $100,000. Again, it's signed by Reid Stuyven, and on page 10 it tells homeowners that, after their EQC assessments, they'll get a final scope of works deciding, and again this is EQC's exact wording,
the best repair strategies to return your home to its pre-earthquake state.
Again, pre-earthquake, not as when new. The reinstatement standard EQC now claim they were working to. And what's interesting about that document is that it's dated November 2014. That's 36 months after the first document we've obtained. So by that stage, EQC have been explicitly citing the measure pre-earthquake state for over 3 years. Indeed, the 32-page long 2014 document doesn't contain the phrase as when new at all. Yesterday, I asked Peter Woods about this. He was the lawyer who took the action against EQC.
As an overview, the standard is as when new.
Okay, as when new. And the action group was formed, and you took this case because EQC weren't sticking to that, right?
That's right. Just about all of the members of the group said to us, when EQC come along and assess the earthquake damage, they tell us, all we've got to do is get you back to the pre-earthquake condition, like for like, and you're not allowed any betterment, when the Act clearly provides for full replacement cover.
So, Peter, where did that come from? Was that unilateralism on behalf of the assessors?
I don't know where it's come from. It's been consistent across the board, and I think anyone who's been through the experience will say, well, that's what I was told, and the contractors were told that. So it seems to have been a directive, even though at the top level of EQC, when we've pushed them on it, they have conceded that their obligation was to meet the as-when-new standard.
So they've conceded that, it's what the Act says, but on the grounds where the people live, where the lives are, they were insisting repeatedly that it was simply pre-earthquake standard.
That's correct.
So this is a big one for EQC to respond to. What do they say to this? Is there a contradiction between their position over the past 2 days and their position in those documents that span 3 years and their position as being described then by the lawyer Peter Woods? Were they repairing and rebuilding to as when new? And did they tell their contractors that? What was this pre-quake standard? We asked EQC for an interview and they declined, saying no one was available. But at 4:15, 6 hours after we contacted them, they did send us a written statement, and we'll read that shortly. But first, some Christchurch homeowners and their battles to get as when new rebuilds and repairs, or anything that accurately reflected the true cost of the damage their home had suffered. This is just a sample of the people we have spoken to in the past 2 days. Our reporter Alex Ashton has put this together.
My name is Liz Griffiths. I was based in Wairaki Road in Christchurch. The initial assessment had been for $45,000 to repair my house. To cut it very short, after years of fighting EQC, that eventually came up to $160 from $45. And then with the engineering reports done by the insurance company, I was finally paid out about $660.
We battled for over 2 years to convince EQC that our house, the damage was over cap. We later settled with our insurance company for over $800,000.
Mark Gilmore and Althea Callison. We lived in Littleton. We went to our insurance company, AMI. They came back and said it would cost $170,000 to repair. EQC immediately came back and said they could do it for $35,000. Eventually, we cash settled the repairs for $352,000, which is a long way off the original $35,000. And just recently, I have got a copy of the DRA from Southern Response, which indicates that they thought the final figure could be $478,000.
In October 2011, Arrow, on behalf of AMI, this was before Southern Response was formed, they looked at the house and they said that it was a rebuild. After a joint review in March 2012, EQC and Southern Response then decided that we were actually under cap, that we weren't a rebuild, so we went from being a rebuild to being straight under cap. After that, it then took us until July last year to get EQC to admit that we were actually over cap, and their final figure was that we were actually just shy of $400,000 to repair the house, and also their engineer's report says that we're going to be repaired to our pre-earthquake condition.
An assessment was made by an engineer. They reckoned it would be about $30,000 to repair, but the repair wasn't really a repair, it was a cover-up and wouldn't repair the actual damage that was caused. Eventually, after 3 years, I eventually got over cap and got paid out the $115,000 that was the limit for EQC, and now I'm arguing with my insurance company.
But we had to spend that 2 years battling with EQC just to get them out of the way so that we could start dealing with the insurance company and get on with our lives. It was really frustrating.
I was definitely told that the repair was, according to EQC, only reasonably sufficient. They weren't willing to talk about that, a proper repair and repairing as new. That really never came up with them.
So that was Alex Ashton, our reporter, talking to people who have contacted us since Checkpoint went to air last night. They are really confused. EQC keeps saying we were repairing or rebuilding to as when new whenever possible, and those people, as you heard, contacted us to say that wasn't the case, and it certainly wasn't their experience. So there is a contradiction here, and we've heard from a great many more people than Alex was able to speak to. We went to EQC for a response at 10 this morning. We were told nobody was available to speak to us today, and at 4:16 we received the statement attributable to EQC's Acting Chief Executive, Brian Dunn. It says, the wording used in the customer guide to the Canterbury Home Repair Program guide was a broad statement intended to be a general guide for customers, not a legal statement about our approach to settling claims. Now, that was in the piece that we led off with at the top of the program tonight, the piece I referred to, which talked about pre-earthquake, not as when new. And I forwarded them that document, even though it was their own, but it was just one of the documents we had. In retrospect, EQC continue, the wording we used was too general, and in the current context, we accept that it may be confusing. However, as the joint statement says, when settling claims, EQC's approach has been that required by the EQC Act, and that the EQC Act insures houses for the replacement value, which includes the cost to reinstate a house to substantially the same, but not better, more extensive than its condition when new, and the cost of complying with any applicable laws. This has always been EQC's position as to how it settles building damage claims. Any customer can request a review of their individual claim if they believe EQC has missed earthquake damage sustained to their home, if they don't agree with the repair strategy we have proposed, or if they believe the settlement amount is incorrect, using EQC's standard processes for doing this, which are detailed on our website. That is EQC's response to all of this. They did decline our invitation to be interviewed tonight. Advanced melanoma patients say news that MedSafe has approved the use of Keytruda alternative, Opdivo, as a positive step towards a melanoma treatment being funded in next month's budget. Currently, the only treatment available for melanoma patients in New Zealand is chemotherapy and radiotherapy, and Pharmac admitted to us in February neither was ideal for treating the disease, particularly when it's metastasised. Last month, petitions with 54,000 signatures were presented to Parliament calling on the government to fund Keytruda, but Pharmac has given that drug a low priority. Catherine Williams was diagnosed with melanoma and given 12 months to live in 2009. She was granted compassionate case access to an immunotherapy vaccine by the Milligan Institute, and she remains in remission 7 years later. Catherine said the registration of Opdivo, or nivolumab as it's also known, is welcome news to terminal melanoma patients.
John, it's great news because Opdivo is a great addition to the registered drugs. I think the main thing today is to keep in mind that melanoma patients across New Zealand are on tender hooks around the decisions for a funded effective treatment in New Zealand. This is great. It's a step in the right direction. And I want to diminish the positivity of today. We need to take it that step closer to the government picking up one of these registered drugs and saying, guys, this is what we're going to fund. It's a really, really difficult climate, John. It's an immensely difficult time for melanoma patients, their families and their communities, because we are in this conundrum where we're just waiting and waiting for an announcement from the Minister of Health or our Prime Minister to say we are going to fund effective cancer treatment for melanoma patients, and that's tough. You and I met 7 years ago when I was diagnosed, and I couldn't have imagined that I would be here today to be talking to you about trying to still get something over the line.
There's 2 points that come from that. One, your initial diagnosis was that you were going to die in a very finite period, right? And your continued survival speaks of the immunotherapy treatment you've had. But two, that you are still waiting for funding of immunotherapy treatments for people in a similar position to the one you were in, 7 years ago?
7 years ago. Look, I acknowledge that when I was diagnosed, none of these treatments were available. But John, in 5 years plus, the research has been done, the drugs have been made, they're on the shelves. Our Commonwealth partners are using the drugs. Patients are presenting to oncology clinics in Australia, in Britain, in Canada. They are receiving these drugs. So I am talking to New Zealanders now and telling them that Keytruda, which you're all well aware of, Opdivo, that was registered yesterday and approved in New Zealand. You know, these are the drugs we are talking about. These are the drugs that melanoma cancer patients are talking about. These are the drugs that we are pleading with the New Zealand government to fund.
Can we look at the two forms that are available, Opdivo and Keytruda? Do you understand what the difference is between them, or are they just different brands of the same thing, more or less?
Look, the simplest way to explain it, and I'm really conscious of explaining it so that New Zealanders understand it, Opdivo and Keytruda are drugs which help your immune system to do what your immune system is designed to do. So chemotherapy, radiation, historically, look, those are effective cancer treatments, absolutely. All you need to understand is that they are not effective in treating melanoma. The new generation cancer drugs, which are being used internationally, Professor Antoni Ribas, who attended the Melanoma Summit in 2015, and was on a panel like myself, is absolutely astounded that New Zealand just is not getting it. We're not taking on board that we need to formulate a clinical response. These drugs have arrived. It's not complex. All we need to understand is that the drugs are available. It is achievable that we can get these to cancer patients. Of course it's achievable. It's not easy. It's been tough. It's tough for people like Jonah Wilkins, who, you know, lost her grandson. It's tough for a whole lot of patients and their families, but we will get there. It is the landscape we're on. The new generation cancer drugs are here. They're not going away. Our minister and our PM can continue to say that there are efficacy issues, that there were cost issues. I don't believe that is relative now. The news of Opdivo is fantastic. We had a huge emotional outpouring from patients today, John. It's really, really tough stuff, but we are hopeful. And I am hopeful that we are closer to securing funded, effective cancer treatment for melanoma patients in New Zealand.
That's Catherine Williams, who was told 7 years ago she had less than a year to live. She was on an experimental immunotherapy. Her metastasized, her secondary melanoma, is in remission. She's now a spokesperson, an advocate for melanoma patients. We'd love your feedback about these drugs, these immunotherapy drugs. Obviously, they are expensive. Should they be funded? checkpoint@radionz.co.nz is our email address. Text 2101 to deal with us via the phone. Coming up on Checkpoint, urban and rural fire services will be merged at a cost of $300 million. The Warriors, they're losing on the field. They are in trouble off it. What on earth is going on with New Zealand's NRL franchise? And what beautiful weather we're having, which is wonderful if you're in Wellington and enjoying a magnificent autumn, but not so good if you're a farmer desperate for rain. All of that coming up. More than $300 million is to be injected into merging the country's fire services into one organisation called Fire and Emergency New Zealand. The merger of urban and rural fire services was signalled in November last year, but details about how the change in the new organisation will be funded were released this morning. While the fire service is welcoming the funding announcement, some say it has simply missed the mark. Emergency Services reporter Adriana Webber has more.
The Internal Affairs Minister, Peter Dunn, says $303 million will be spent in the next 5 years on the merger. He says the fire levy, which is paid from contents, property and car insurance, will be the main source of funding for the new organisation. The Fire Service's National Commander, Paul Baxter, says the new funding model better reflects the changing role of firefighters.
fire makes up less than 30% of what we do now in terms of emergency response. So the different types of incidents that firefighters face today aren't just fires, are floods, various sorts of rescues, motor vehicle and other transportation rescue, hazardous materials, medical response to support ambulance services.
But the head of the Insurance Council, Tim Grafton, says continuing to fund the emergency service through levies on insurance is the wrong answer. As part of the changes, the fire levy on car insurance will be extended to include third-party insurance. Mr Grafton said that still means that 10% of drivers who don't have car insurance get away without paying for a service they might benefit from.
If you're a hard-working person who protects your property by taking out insurance for your house or your contents or your motor vehicle, you pay for the fire service, and a whole lot of people who don't insure still get the benefit and don't contribute at all. So, we should be moving to another system.
Mr Grafton says the government had an opportunity to make funding fairer for everyone, but chose the wrong path. The Automobile Association's Mike Noon agrees.
There were other places where the levy could have been put on road user charges and on excise tax, or indeed on the registration, which would have made sure that nearly everybody was paying their fair share. The way it has been announced, there will be some people who will be freeloading.
Mr Noon says people's car insurances now could increase in price, but he didn't know by how much. The Professional Firefighters Union's Derek Best says he would have liked to have seen a fairer way of funding the new organisation. But overall, he was pleased with the announcement, especially knowing jobs won't be affected.
Those people that will transfer into a new organisation will just continue with their present sort of wages and conditions of employment. So we're not having to worry about those things, so we can focus on the big issues of making sure the new structures and operational procedures and so on are correct.
Fire and Emergency New Zealand is expected to be up and running in July next year. For Checkpoint, Adriana Webber.
News headlines coming up, some sport before it. New Zealand Warriors camp has been thrown into disarray following today's announcement that 6 players have been axed from this weekend's side to face St George Illawarra Dragons in the National Rugby League competition. Coach Andrew McFadden said they failed to meet team standards. RNZ has since learned that the players in question were out in Auckland City on Tuesday night following their 42-0 thrashing at the hands of Melbourne Storm, breaching team protocol. Matt Chatterton with this report.
What most concerns Warriors coach Andrew McFadden and CEO Jim Doyle is that at least 3 of the group are considered senior members of the Warriors team. Ben Matalino, the Warriors Player of the Year twice in the last 4 years, Manu Vatuvei, who's been with the club for 12 years and is on track to become the Warriors' most capped player, and Bodine Thompson all know the rules and the expectations on them, but broke them anyway. An extremely disappointed Doyle says that sort of attitude won't be tolerated. But he denied the rumours of late-night drinking.
We're not going to speculate on rumours. As I say, we've dealt with it internally. Whether they're accurate or not, I've heard a few people say a few things already, and so we're not going to say which ones are right, which ones are wrong. But no, as I say, we've dealt with it. And as far as we're concerned, we're not going to talk about any more of the detail.
However, Checkpoint has since learned that the players were out on the town until the early hours of Wednesday morning, and they then turned up late to a team meeting the next morning, prompting an investigation and then punishment. And this isn't the first time some of these players have been called on team protocol. Last year, Conrad Hurrell and Manu Vatuvei were part of a group that went to a concert just 2 nights before they were thumped 50-16 by the Wests Tigers. A year on, Coach McFadden is making it clear this sort of behaviour won't be tolerated, and he's not keeping that secret. Here's a snippet of some of his answers from the Warriors media conference.
Does it concern you that your pack seems to be being beaten up a little more regularly than usual?
Yes.
Does that come then down to maybe making the wrong selection choices, Andrew?
Well, I need to make changes if they're not going to aim up.
You named that 17 in a rush, I think, before coming home from Melbourne. Do you think, can we expect more changes?
Possibly.
Andrew, do you still feel like you're the right man for the job coaching these guys?
Yes, I do.
Sources I've spoken to suggest McFadden's stance of dropping the group to the NRL's second division competition isn't the answer, and that a fine would be more of an incentive to sharpen up. One source went on to say that McFadden may not have the administrative support to carry on should he suffer any more big losses. The Warriors' next match is against St George Illawarra on Sunday. A lot is riding on it. For Checkpoint, Matt Chatterton.
Coming up, Invercargill Mayor Tim Shadbolt heads to Dunedin to join a protest outside the hospital against the Compass meal contract. Wellington basks in unusual sunshine. Don't take that, Wellington, it's not unusual. It's always sunny in Wellington. And Dick Smith has just closed its New Zealand doors for the last time. But first, here's Katrina Batten with the 5:30 headlines, 4 minutes and 54 seconds late.
Well, basically 5 minutes late. So yes, the Overseas Investment Office is investigating after revelations two Argentinian brothers it allowed to buy a large Taranaki farm have convictions for environmental pollution in Buenos Aires. The OIO previously said it was satisfied due process was followed when it granted consent for Rafael and Federico Grozowski to buy Onatai Station near Awakino in 2014. But in a statement this afternoon, the office says it's now investigating the serious issues raised in media reports. The Earthquake Commission has defended its stance on what standard homes have been repaired to in Christchurch. It announced yesterday a settlement with a group of 98 Canterbury homeowners who'd taken legal action. At issue was a dispute over whether earthquake damage was repaired to a pre-quake condition or as when new. A number of homeowners say they were told they were entitled only to the lower and cheaper pre-quake standard rebuild. However, today the Earthquake Commission has issued a statement saying the wording used in the Home Repair Program Guide was a broad statement intended to be a general guide, not a legal statement about the approach to settling claims. The Commerce Commission says it's found no evidence of petrol price fixing in its 10-month-long investigation of the market. The Commission says it had an in-depth look at competition in the lead-up to its decision to give Z Energy permission to take over its rival Caltex. Apart from asking Z to sell 19 service stations and a truck stop, it imposed no other conditions. In Australia, the maker of Nurofen, Rickett Benkaiser, has been fined $1.7 million for breaching consumer laws. Australia's competition watchdog had asked the federal court to impose a fine of $6 million. The court earlier found the range of so-called pain-specific Nurofen products all contained the same active ingredient and did the same thing. An Otago University student who stole exam papers, including her own, has been sentenced to 12-month supervision in order to pay $6,400 in reparation. The woman, who was given permanent name suppression, had pleaded guilty to burglary for stealing 98 papers in November. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6 with more news, sport and weather.
Thank you very much, Katrina. We look forward to seeing you then, which is only 23 minutes away, owing to tardiness on my part. Turning to business news now with Giles Beckford, and the Commerce Commission has given the thumbs up, Giles, to one of the biggest takeovers in years, Z Energy over Caltex.
It's thick end, $750 million. Wow. When you put it that way. That's a big one. It's the biggest we've had in quite a while. It's, as you were hearing in the news, it allows Z to take over Caltex, so that'll going to give them pretty close to half the retail petrol market in New Zealand, somewhere in the order of 300 stations there or thereabouts, and it'll obviously give them a reasonable boost in their earnings as well. So from that point of view, Z is smiling. It calls into question, of course, how much longer in the current oil environment that the big overseas players, BP and Mobil, who are still here, how long they might want to stay and whether they might want to go the same way that Shell and now Chevron have gone. So we'll wait and see on that one. But it goes without saying that the share market loved it. Z Energy shares up around 10% to a record high, so they're doing very nicely, and they're expecting to get at least $30 million worth of savings, and you've got to figure probably a bit more over time.
Wow. As always, more economic numbers out today. Gosh, we get a lot of them, don't, but these are quite interesting ones today, aren't they?
Well, they are. This is the monthly RNZ Business Confidence Survey. It's a pretty closely tracked survey. The RBNZ likes to look at it quite closely because it gives you a real snapshot for what's happening right now on the shop floor, in the shops and the factories, and it shows that confidence has perked up a little bit. It's still not fantastic. The more important own activity indicator there is a little bit stronger as well, and that tends to show that companies themselves are in pretty good heart going into winter. They're expecting to make reasonable money, reasonable sales. They're going to invest, and they're going to be looking to hire staff. And that leads quite neatly into some big numbers we'll get next week, which is the first quarter labour market survey. And we'll have jobs numbers and wages. We're expecting unemployment rates somewhere around 5.5%, which would mean that we're staying pretty steady. But unfortunately, I can tell you that the numbers aren't expected to show big wage rises, as we all know.
Giles, let's end the week with the markets. How did they close today?
Nice and positive. That top 50 index for shares up 31 points at 68.21, and the Kiwi dollar also on a firm note, 69.8 US cents and just over 91 Australian.
Yeah, it is. Giles Beckford, our business editor. Thanks very much, Giles. Giles has been filing all week, and we thoroughly enjoy our chats with him out of Wellington. More than 300 people, some from as far away as Invercargill, are gathered outside the entrance to Dunedin Hospital this afternoon, calling for Compass's food supply contract for Otago and Southland hospitals to be cancelled. Yeah, they weren't equivocating. Compass was awarded a 15-year contract earlier this year. It now prepares most of the food in Auckland and Tauranga and trucks it frozen to Dunedin and Invercargill Hospital. They also have Meals on Wheels contracts. Invercargill Mayor Tim Shabok drove to Dunedin to voice his concerns. He believes the closure of the hospital kitchens, in their old-fashioned terms, has been a disaster.
Well, I know we're a small region. We only represent 3% of New Zealand's population, but our 80% of the produce and the food we make in Invercargill and Southland is exported overseas. We produce brilliant, fresh, healthy food, and we want to give that to the local people who get sick.
What sort of feedback have you been getting from your constituents, not in Dunedin but Invercargill, about the food they're getting?
Well, this has really driven this whole protest and the dissatisfaction we've been hearing about today. It's driven by the people in the hospitals who are having to eat this food, and they are just not happy. We're not the sort of people that complain. We're pretty stoic about all sorts of issues, but when you're ill, when you're sick, you want food that isn't just minerals and vitamins. You want food that makes you feel good. You want food where you've got variety, where if you ask the nurse for an egg sandwich, you can have it. And our kitchens are being closed down. It's a tragic situation.
Tim, there's quite a big contingent, our reporter Peter Newport says, there from Invercargill. Have quite a few people made what? It's a 3-hour drive, isn't it? Have quite a few people made the trip?
Yeah, well, about 2.5 hours in the Merrill car, but yes, it is a long trip, and I think they feel very strongly about this for a whole range of issues. And as I said, we're not trying to get anything extreme. We're not saying we should have a gourmet restaurant in every hospital, but we are saying good, healthy, nourishing food that we grow locally. That's what we should be eating.
Tim, have you seen any of the food, or have you even tried any of it?
Yes, well, I went, of course, we had a caesarean, so I was in hospital for a week. We're very lucky in Southland. The partner can stay in the same room on a camp stretcher, and so I was eating hospital food there for a week, and it was delicious. It was really cheap. It was really nourishing, and it was extremely popular. I've just poked my head in the door here in Dunedin, and the cafeteria is virtually empty. It's almost a boycott that's happening, and it wasn't the case. It certainly wasn't the case 3 years ago that I experienced.
Okay, so you genuinely believe that under Compass's contract, under the awarding of the contract to Compass, the food has deteriorated markedly?
I certainly do, and I know it will be held up as a reason why we can't change. But look, you can change contracts. We had a contract last night at our infrastructure meeting where the company just couldn't do the job, and they were honest about it. And we had a parachute clause, and I think anyone who's responsible in central government or local government who signs a major contract and doesn't have a parachute clause, because we've seen what's happened with Circa in our prisons, you've got to be able to get out if there's customer dissatisfaction, if the people aren't happy about the service they're receiving.
Have you talked to the DHB about the possibility of that happening, Tim?
No, I've talked to representatives from Compass, and they'll be my next port of call when they have their regular meeting. And it's a pity that we've lost the health boards. We've just got to accept that we're an ageing population and people are going to be needing more health services than we've had in the past, and we've just got to accept that.
Tim, it's sounding really quite noisy behind you. Are people really worked up about this?
They are very passionate, John, about this. And it's, as I said, being led to me, the speakers that came forward were just so genuine. They were the ones who had really experienced what the food was like. And people one lady who had mental health problems to do with diet. I mean, they were telling their personal human stories and experiences, and you can't help being moved by that.
Tim Shadbolt, who drove from Invercargill to Dunedin to attend the protest, in a statement to Checkpoint, Compass's Chief Operating Officer Julian Baldy said the company was confident its food was good enough. He says most patients seem happy with what they're being served based on satisfaction surveys. Mr Baldy says Compass has already been operating in other New Zealand hospitals for 30 years and says the food quality has not and will not be compromised to cut costs. Mr Baldy says that nearly half of the meals prepared in Dunedin Hospital are for special diets. That means they're often intentionally pureed or thickened and aren't comparable to standard meals. We also received a short statement from the Southern District Health Board, which runs Dunedin Hospital where the protest took place. Its Chief Executive Carol Heatley says Compass knows the standard it has to meet and since April has been given targets it has to meet. She says the company has been responsive to those concerns so far. Ms Heatley also calls for people not to read into the images being shared on social media, and if they have concerns, to get in touch with the Health Board. It's 14 minutes to 6 on Checkpoint. A man is dead and 2 people are in hospital after a shooting at a shopping mall in the suburb of Bankstown in Sydney this afternoon. When police arrived at the scene, they found 3 injured people, 2 men and a woman. But a 40-year-old man has died of his injuries at the scene. The gunman is still on the loose. ABC reporter Stephanie Dalzell joins us now. Stephanie, welcome to Checkpoint. What's going on? What's the latest?
Well, police have set up a crime scene here at the car park of the Bankstown Central Shopping Centre, which is in the southwest of Sydney, and that will now be examined by detectives and forensic specialists. A press conference was actually held a short time ago, and police said that at this stage no arrests had been made. As you mentioned, the gunman is still at large, but they do say that there's indications that the gunman didn't act alone. Now, emergency crews were called here just before midday local time after reports of a shooting in the car park. They arrived to find 2 men and 1 woman injured. The 1 man had critical injuries and died at the scene, while a 60-year-old man and 31-year-old woman were taken to hospital with gunshot wounds. Now, the deceased man hasn't been formally identified, but police say that they believe he was clearly targeted.
Okay, so this was a deliberate hit on him, so to speak. Sorry, that's a very pejorative term. But what else are the police saying about any possible motive? Is there any discussion about that at all so far?
No, police really seem to be focusing at the moment on reassuring the public that they're safe and there's nothing to worry about. Locals are clearly rattled. One who I spoke to earlier said she doesn't feel safe in this area anymore. She said she'd shop elsewhere, that she'd been coming to Bankstown Central for years and now would be finding an alternative shopping centre. But there's a lot of police resources here at the moment, but they've sought to reassure the public and said that those resources, all the police cars and the police officers here, that's purely a proactive stance and that the community has absolutely nothing to worry about.
Thank you, Stephanie. Just before you go, the 2 people who are in hospital, do you know anything about their condition?
We have no updates on their condition. We were told that they were shot in the legs and that their injuries weren't critical, but we don't know anything else at this stage.
ABC reporter Stephanie Dalzell. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Stephanie joining us live from the scene. If we hear any more about that, obviously the police are saying that this person who was shot and killed appears to have been deliberately targeted in the car park. The Transport Minister has sent a please explain letter to Auckland's Transport Agency after claims that the city's election signage bylaws breach the Bill of Rights. 2 mayoral candidates will defy the bylaws, with businesswoman Vic Crone planning to resume a billboard campaign which the Auckland Council banned last month. Another candidate, activist Penny Bright, will ask the government to rule the bylaw as unlawful. Now, the move raises questions about the policing advertising in the Auckland election, which have now gone all the way to the Beehive. Our Auckland correspondent Todd Niall filed this report.
I'm on Hobson Street in central Auckland. I'm standing next to one of those large commercial billboards that you see in high traffic areas around the country. This one's on the side of a building. It's advertising a home-based childcare service. This is a site that has council resource consent and quite legally, permanently advertises things that motorists drive past on their way up Hobson Street. But last month, when mayoral candidate Vic Crone used the same site to advertise her campaign, the Auckland Council was less happy.
They contacted us in a very friendly way to start with, and then that escalated into some quite strong assertions to take billboards down immediately.
The council was wielding its election signs bylaw, which for this election's been expanded to include not just traditional pop-up signs at intersections and roadsides, but all signs, even those on private property. The bylaw bans election advertising outside the 9 weeks leading up to October's election day. Vic Crone says she's obtained a legal opinion that says the bylaw is unlawful because it breaches freedom of expression under the Bill of Rights Act.
You can't restrict freedom of speech. I've been targeted in terms of restricting political speech around my campaign in an unfair manner, and the reason for that is public safety. Look, there is no more danger in my billboard than there is with Dan Carter and its boxes.
Public law professor Andrew Geddes expressed a similar view to RNZ News last month. Since then, I've been trying to get a response from both the Auckland Council, which enforces the bylaw, and its agency Auckland Transport, which drew it up. After 3 weeks, Auckland Transport would provide only a 3-line statement, which effectively says the bylaw is the bylaw and any issues will be reviewed after October's election.
I've got 3 words to say to Auckland Transport: go to hell.
Blunt as ever, activist and mayoral candidate Penny Bright has now joined the fray. The bylaw is part of the Minister of Transport's portfolio, and Penny Bright wants Simon Bridges to declare that it's illegal.
And I'll be looking forward to as many other mayoral candidates in Auckland, or potential candidates, or civil libertarians, or anyone who's interested in the basic lawful rights of citizens and ratepayers to express a political opinion in their own backyard, to sign it.
Vic Crone says she will resume her billboard campaign and has asked the council to review its stance, with legal action a later option.
Auckland is the biggest council in Australasia, and we deserve to have time to think about who will be our next mayor. And part of communicating to the public is to use billboards.
Auckland Council until today declined to comment, but a short time ago released a reply its electoral officer sent to Ms Crone, saying the bylaw was valid and enforceable, and any determination by the minister was awaited with interest. Auckland Transport's election bylaw notes that it considered Bill of Rights issues, and it says the extension to private sites was to avoid what it called confusion and unnecessary visual distraction. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Todd Niall.
Now, the Transport Minister, Simon Bridges, told RNZ News he sought legal advice both on the bylaw and on his powers to disallow transport-related bylaws. He's today asked Auckland Transport to clarify the purpose of the new bylaw and how it complies with legislation, including the Bill of Rights. We'll keep you posted on what unfolds there. It is 7 minutes to 6. Uber is sticking with its rule changes for drivers despite the transport agency saying it's illegal. The smartphone-based driver service last week dropped its requirements for drivers to have a passenger or P endorsement for their licence or a certificate of fitness for their car. But despite the endorsement being a legal requirement for those carrying paying passengers, Uber says it's doing nothing wrong. Tom Furley reports.
Uber says it dropped the P endorsement requirement after complaints that it took too long and made it too expensive to become a driver. An Auckland Uber driver, Brian Wilson, says it took 2 months and cost about $700 to get his. He says drivers now carry the risk of not having the right licence, but he doubts new drivers will carry on getting it.
I think the existing ones will. The new ones, no. I think very unlikely that they will, because it's a very high cost. They'd have to be convinced. They'd have to hear from somebody who knows what's involved, what is really at risk, what it is that they stand to lose. they could be basically bankrupted.
The transport agency says it's illegal to drive paying passengers without a P endorsement. Drivers who are caught face a fine of up to $10,000 the first time. The second time their car is impounded and the maximum fine is $25,000. The agency's group manager of access and use, Celia Patrick, is urging would-be Uber drivers to get to know the law and says work is already being done to crack down on those flouting the rules.
We're actively receiving complaints now from members of the public, and so we're investigating people that are driving for Uber without the passenger endorsement. The range of things that we might do, at the moment we're issuing warnings to those people we've investigated, but we also have the option of issuing infringement notices. Ultimately, we can also go to court.
Last week, the government announced a raft of potential changes to the taxi and ride-sharing industry after pressure for a shake-up. But the proposed rules, which could come into effect next year, would still require Uber drivers to carry a P endorsement. The Taxi Federation's Executive Director, Tim Reddish, says Uber doesn't like the proposed changes, so it's done its own thing.
I mean, what's going on is outrageous, and it's incumbent on Land Transport New Zealand and the Police Commercial Vehicle Investigation Unit to start dealing to these drivers. And more importantly, I think the government has to have the fortitude to deal with Uber as a company, because it's just outrageous and passenger safety is severely at risk.
But Uber is sticking by the move. Its Director of Public Policy, Brad Kitschke, says drivers aren't doing anything wrong.
The last time I checked, there was no problem with sharing a ride in your own vehicle, and that's exactly what people are doing. They're sharing a ride in their own car that meets their needs around their other activities. That's what people are doing. We think that it would be completely unacceptable if a government thought to punish people for providing safe and reliable transport.
Mr Kitschke says the government's review of the industry has failed to cut the red tape and it needs to create a licensing regime for Uber drivers who work for a few hours in their own time. For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
Let's head to Wellington now. An unseasonable bout of warm weather in the capital is curing the usual summer hangover. NIWA says this month Wellington has been nearly 2 degrees hotter on average than normal, with the temperature peaking at an incredible 23.7 degrees. But it's spelling doom and gloom for farmers who are getting sick of praying for rain. Max Toll filed this report.
It's a Friday afternoon. Wellington's wind is blowing a gale and the sun's out, as it has been for almost 200 hours this month, and the locals are delighted.
We've done more gardening than we probably would have been doing, something we would have done February, March rather than in April. Definitely noticed the blue skies a lot more.
It's crazy warm this summer. We've been at the beach every weekend. Last weekend it's the middle of autumn and it's still really, really warm.
We've been discussing whether it's climate change.
Yeah, global
and we
warming.
think it is, because this weather at the beginning of May is unheard of in Wellington.
I've just come up from Christchurch and it's the same story down there. People are still going to the beach. Oh, it's dry as a bone down there, yeah. Even the little creeks around Christchurch are drying up. In a city, I mean. But it's just lovely. It's lovely.
One of NIWA's weather gurus, Chris Brandolino, says the capital's only had what it calls 5 wet days this month. That's when at least 1 millimetre of rain falls, and just 20 overall this year. That's the second fewest on record.
Sunshine has been abundant, ranking in the top 10 for April sunshine, 188 hours. That's 116% of normal. So it's been a very warm, a very sunny, and a very dry month.
He says the sun isn't going anywhere fast over the next few months, but there is the chance of a few more downpours to dampen the mood.
There's a really high chance it'll be warm. Warmer than average temperatures are expected across not just the Wellington area, but the entire country. So this will be a very warm 3-month period potentially. In terms of rainfall, we think there's about an equal chance for rainfall to be where it should be or greater than usual.
That last part will be music to the ears of farmers, particularly in parts of the Wairarapa just north of Wellington, where the ground's running dry. Federated Farmers dairy spokesperson for the region, Chris Engel, says winter feedstocks are depleting way ahead of schedule.
We'll look on the rainfall and they'll say 80% chance, and then a few days later it's 30%. Then 20%, because it's only certain areas of the province. No one's really talked about it, but it's sort of quietly been happening.
So all you can do now really is pray for rain, I guess.
That's it, but we've been doing that every week. My knees have got bloody worn out.
Federated Farmers says it's equally bleak in parts of Marlborough and Canterbury, and with dairy farmers already under severe financial pressure, they can't afford to run out of feed this early on. In the words of Bob Marley, they're hoping the rain NIWA is predicting comes to the rescue. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Max Toll.
Nice, Max. Coming up to the 6 o'clock news, after listening to John Campbell, Scissors correspondent regarding EQC, I had to write to let you know briefly about our circumstances. We were told by EQC that we were under cap until about a year ago. A cap's 100,000. We were bullied to go ahead with repair, but decided to get second opinion. Eventually went over cap, and we're now looking at a rebuild of over $1 million. We are now with the class action against Southern Response because we want something done properly. This is a complete fiasco and New Zealand should be ashamed. But this person says, I don't live in Christchurch. Why do my premiums have to pay for 50 years wear and tear to get a Christchurch homeowner back to as when new? Thank you for your feedback. We do like hearing from you. Checkpoint at radionz.co.nz or text 2101. Now, a special Friday edition of the Pips. Kia ora everyone, you are with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Lovely to have your company on this Friday evening. If you want to watch us at work, we're streaming live on the RNZ website and screening live on Freeview Channel 50. But if you're listening on the radio, it is wonderful to have you with us. In the next 30 minutes, Dick Smith finally shuts up shop in New Zealand, the end of an era. Hundreds gather outside Dunedin Hospital to protest against the quality of Compass's hospital meals. And the search for Rodney, it's very important he's found, but does he want to be found? All of that and more coming up. But first, here's RNZ News with Katrina Batten.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. The Overseas Investment Office is investigating after revelations today two Argentinian brothers, the office allowed to buy a large Taranaki farm, have criminal convictions for environmental pollution. The Labour Party says documents it's obtained, as well as media reports, show Rafael and Federico Grozowski, who brought Onatai Station in 2014, were found criminally responsible for chemical dumping from their Buenos Aires tannery. The pair are linked with the Panamanian law firm Mossack Fonseca, which is at the centre of the Panamanian Papers revelations about how the rich hide their wealth in overseas trusts. The OIO has said previously it was satisfied due process was followed when it granted consent for the brothers to buy the 1,300-hectare farm near Awakino. But in a statement issued this evening, it says it's now investigating the serious issues raised in media reports. The Earthquake Commission is being challenged on its insistence it always repaired earthquake damage to an as-when-new standard. It announced yesterday a settlement with a group of 98 Canterbury homeowners who'd taken legal action. Belinda McCammon reports.
At issue was a dispute over whether earthquake damage was repaired to a pre-quake condition or as when new. In an interview with Checkpoint's John Campbell yesterday after the settlement, the Commission insisted it repaired to the highest standard whenever possible. But RNZ has obtained internal EQC papers that show pre-quake was repeatedly cited as the standard, and a number of homeowners say they were told they were entitled only to the lower and cheaper pre-quake standard rebuild. In Christchurch, Belinda McCammon.
And the Acting Chief Executive of Earthquake Commission, Brian Dunn, says the wording used in its customer guide was a broad statement and was intended to be a general guide for people. He says in retrospect the wording was too general and could be confusing. However, he says the Commission's approach has always been to repair houses to a when-new condition. Steel and Tube is being allowed back into the seismic reinforcing mesh market 3 weeks after it had to withdraw its products when they failed crucial tests. The company has maintained its in-house testing is good enough, but the Commerce Commission will only let it sell mesh for house slab floors that has independent testing. Last week, Eurocorp was allowed to resume selling seismic mesh after being forced out in early March after failed tests. The Commission says both companies must now show it results of stringent third-party tests on each batch of seismic mesh. It's still investigating if Steel and Tube breached fair trading laws by producing testing certificates with a laboratory logo on them when that lab did not do the tests and whether it misrepresented its mesh as complying with the standard. The Automobile Association says people without car insurance will continue to freeload assistance from the fire service despite changes announced today. The Internal Affairs Minister, Peter Dunn, says $303 million will be spent on combining all urban and rural fire services into one organisation called Fire and Emergency New Zealand. Mr Dunn says the fire levy, collected from contents, property and vehicle insurance, will fund it. He says drivers with third-party car insurance will also have to pay a fire services levy from July 2018. But the Automobile Association's Mike Noon says that isn't fair.
There were other places where the levy could have been put on road user charges and on excise tax, or indeed on the registration, which would have made sure that nearly everybody was paying their fair share. The way it has been announced, there will be some people who will be freeloading.
Mike Noon of the Automobile Association. The Transport Agency is urging Uber drivers to make sure they understand the laws on driving passengers. Uber last week dropped its requirements for drivers to have a passenger or P endorsement for their licence or a certificate of fitness for their vehicle. But the agency says it's illegal to carry passengers for hire without the P endorsement. Its Group Manager of Access and Use, Celia Patrick, says the licence checks done by Uber are far less rigorous than those done to get the endorsement. The Waikato District Health Board says hospital patients may have been exposed to measles after a staff member was diagnosed with the disease. The DHB says the person was working in the hospital while infectious but before developing any symptoms. It says it's now tracing all patients and other staff members who may have been exposed. The DHB says the staff member had been fully vaccinated against measles, and this is a rare case of the immunisation not working. It's the 9th case of measles to be confirmed in the region since April the 12th, with another 3 under investigation. To sport, and the Chief Executive of New Zealand Rugby, Steve Tew, has reacted angrily to suggestions the organisation isn't doing all it can to win Olympic gold. The Hurricanes player Ardie Savea has pulled out of contention for the men's sevens, saying he wants to concentrate on Super Rugby. Apart from Sonny Bill Williams, there are no high-profile All Blacks vying for a place in Rio, and Savea's withdrawal has prompted criticism that NZ Rugby may have shoulder-tapped Savea to stay home from Rio. Tew totally rejects that.
We have absolutely emphasised Rio. We have invested literally millions of dollars in both the men's and women's program, significantly more money than we've ever put anywhere near sevens in the past. And if you look at the women's program, we now have a group of professional full-time athletes, which we would never have envisaged if we weren't going to the Olympics.
Meanwhile, the injury-riddled competition leaders, the Chiefs, kick off round 10 of the Super Rugby tonight against South African side the Sharks in New Plymouth. Chiefs co-captain Sam Cane admits the forwards in particular are struggling.
Scrum and even line-out time, we probably couldn't win quite as much ball as we would have liked, so we're fighting to give our backs any pill we can get, because they've been pretty lethal with what limited pill they have had so far.
And Peter Burling and Blair Tuke have retained their lead in the men's 49er class at the World Cup sailing event in Here. 2 other New Zealand crews are in the top of their respective classes, with Joe Alley and Polly Powery second in the women's 740 and Josh Jr. second in the Finn class. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, Julian Fellows, the phenomenon of British television, the man behind Downton Abbey, on his new project Belgravia. Chats about how to improve your life and how easy or not it is to do that too, with Professor Susan David from Harvard and Victoria's Dr. Mark Wilson. Type 3 diabetes, what is that? The Vibe, 20 years on from the movie The Castle, and the New Zealand song 30 years on that chilled us regarding Chernobyl, with Jim Mora tomorrow morning in for Kim Hill on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland and Auckland, a few showers tomorrow, clearing south of Orewa in the afternoon. Waikato to Kapiti, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Areas of cloud, especially in the west, a few showers about Coromandel tomorrow evening. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Wellington, mostly cloudy tomorrow with a few showers developing in Hawke's Bay and Gisborne from late morning. Nelson and Marlborough fine, Buller and Westland cloudy periods, a few showers developing in Westland this afternoon and spreading to Buller overnight. Fiordland, rain at times, possibly heavy and thundery today. Canterbury, a few showers developing this evening, clearing tomorrow morning and then fine spells developing. Otago and Southland, fine spells tomorrow, but a few spots of rain possible in the evening. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with a few showers this evening and tomorrow morning. It is almost 9 minutes past 6.
Thank you very much, Katrina Batten.
Thank you, John Campbell.
Have a lovely weekend.
I will.
Who are the Chiefs playing tonight? You said so not long ago, didn't you?
I did. Let me have a look because it's gone. It's gone.
They're going to beat them anyway.
The Sharks.
Oh,
and New Plymouth.
Yeah. Sharks and New Plymouth.
And New Plymouth.
That'd be a cracker of a game.
It should be,
yeah.
hopefully.
Go the Chiefs.
Yeah.
I say that with some regret after that Wellington, the Hurricanes were robbed last week.
Terrible.
Anyway, one of our best-known retail brands has opened its stores for the last time today. The Dick Smith Electronics Goods retail chain is in receivership and heavily discounted its stock for its closing down sale. Dick Smith's receiver said earlier in the month all stores in New Zealand would be closed by the end of the working day today. Daniel Walker headed to its central Auckland store.
The staff inside had been told not to speak to media, and Checkpoint couldn't film inside the store, but the walls, once heaving with electronic goods of all kinds, were today mostly bare. The store filled up around lunchtime, but with most shoppers leaving empty-handed. However, there were still some interesting items on offer. Even the store fixtures were for sale. Elaine Rush was heading into the store to find something specific, but emerged with a bit of a surprise.
I was just looking for an Samsung S5 case and then had S4s and S6s. But then I found this diet book. And I just happened to be a nutritionist and so I bought it. It didn't have a price on it and they just made it up at the counter.
Well, the things you find.
Yeah, it was just serendipity. But I mean, I think it probably came with a GoPro or something like that, and because there's no GoPros left, so.
Most goods were 90% discounted, causing some people to take extreme measures to get their bargain. Philip Fee was looking for an antivirus program, but found they had all been bought by just one person.
Because last night I came in and it was at $39 for 5 devices, and it got around probably 150 of those. And when I came in now, they said it's all gone.
Wow.
Someone came in, bought all of it.
So is that a relatively cheap price for normal?
Yeah,
then?
$5.
Wow, yeah. What's it normally at?
129.
More than 400 employees have been made redundant with the store closures. One of the shoppers, Pranish Pratap, said Dick Smith's closure made him a little bit nostalgic.
It's pretty sad when you walk around. I was a retailer that I've grown up with, buying stuff from here, but they've just, I don't know, when they announced that they were going into receivership, there was nothing really there you actually really wanted or needed, because there's a lot of alternatives now anyway.
So where do you think you'll go now that it's all done?
Well, there's other retailers anyway, so it's not like the end of the world or anything. There's like J-Car and all these other smaller retailers which stock quite similar stuff that Dick Smith used to stock but don't really anymore, so it's quite good in that sense, and it's a bit cheaper than what it used to be over here.
Dick Smith has been sold to Kogan.com for an undisclosed price. Kogan.com is expected to relaunch the brand for online-only sales in about a month's time. For Checkpoint, Daniel Walker.
12 minutes past 6 on Checkpoint. Hundreds of people, some from as far away as Invercargill, gathered outside the entrance to Dunedin Hospital this afternoon, calling for Compass's food supply contract for Otago and Southland to be cancelled. Get Compass out, they chanted. Compass was awarded a 15-year contract, though, earlier this year. It now prepares most of the food it serves in the hospitals in Auckland and Tauranga and trucks it frozen to Dunedin and Invercargill. Now, our reporter Peter Newport was at the protest, and I spoke to him just after midday and asked him how many people had turned up.
Well, John, it's building all the time. I mean, this protest has only been underway for about 10 minutes now. The crowd was about 300, maybe 400 a few minutes ago, but every minute more people are arriving. There's a lot of political heavyweights here. Tim Shadbolt's arrived from Invercargill. And I mean, the emotion here, John, is huge. It's not just about food, it's about jobs, it's about the regions. And these people are determined to make a difference and get this Compass contract terminated.
And Peter, without putting too fine a point on it, for people who are listening rather than watching you, it looks like a thoroughly miserable day.
It is. It's pouring with rain. Honestly, John, I don't think that's affected anything here. I think even if it was snowing and if it was blowing a hurricane. There'd be a huge crowd here. And this is not rent-a-crowd. These are not sort of professional demonstrators. These are real people. They have stories, horror stories of bad food in Dunedin Hospital and the other hospitals that are run by the DHB. They really are upset, and they think that the food that we were shown yesterday by Compass was just not typical of what actual patients are getting in the wards.
Peter, we need to remind ourselves, as you just did then, thank you, that this isn't only about Dunedin Hospital, that this is a Meals on Wheels contract in the Otago Southland area, and of course also Southland Hospital too. So have people come from far and wide? Is that your sense?
Absolutely. There are not only the Mayor of Invercargill, but lots of people who live in Invercargill have travelled, leaving early this morning to be here. And they say this is just the start, John. They're going to be organising both a hard copy and an online petition. They want to look at that contract. Already they're drawing parallels between this 15-year Compass food contract and the Serco prison contract that, of course, was terminated recently. That's how confident these people are that they can make a difference and get the food here changed away from Compass to local suppliers.
Peter, I can see a large number of people behind you, a few police officers, not many, and I can hear the sound of speeches going on. What's being said?
These are stories. These are real patients and real relatives who've been invited up onto the podium to just tell people exactly what the food is like. So these aren't political speeches or Labour Party speeches. These are real people, ex-patients and relatives, telling their story about how unacceptable the food is from their point of view.
Right, so they're the complainants. Has there been a response either from the DHB or Compass who are providing the food?
No, I think the exercise yesterday where Compass tried to demonstrate the quality of the food was pretty much their response in advance. I think it's going to be difficult for them to have a response to today's protest because it is clearly so genuine. The police, I think, have been taken a bit by surprise. The crowd is growing so much that Great King Street, where I'm standing now, really is struggling to stay open. They've reduced the traffic just to one way to keep the traffic moving, but already this protest has significantly made an effect on traffic in North Dunedin.
Peter Newport outside Dunedin Hospital earlier today. 300 or 400 people turned out, may even have been more than that in the end, people driving from as far away as Invercargill. It's a wee while since I've done that drive, but Mir Shabbat was telling us it's about 2.5 hours. The pharmaceutical giant that produces the painkiller Nurofen has been fined more than $1.7 million for deliberately misleading customers. Last year, Australia's federal court found Reckitt Benckiser misled consumers with Nurofen's specific pain range because they all contained the same active ingredients and did the same thing. The ABC's Lucy Carter reports.
The Nurofen specific pain range first rang alarm bells in 2010 when consumer group Choice awarded it one of its annual Shonky Awards.
Looking at the branding of these packs and then looking at the ingredients, it was really clear that the same active ingredients were in back pain, period pain or tension pain products.
Choice spokesman Tom Godfrey says that as well as misleading customers, this packaging could potentially cause harm.
We thought, one, that it was a bit of a rip-off because you were paying more than standard relief products, but also it's potentially dangerous to people's health because they could labour under the mistaken belief that if they had two pains, then they needed to take two different products, which of course could lead them to increase the amount of ibuprofen they had unnecessarily.
Last December, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission successfully prosecuted Reckitt Benckiser, the UK pharmaceutical giant that produces Nurofen and its specific pain range. The federal court ruled that 4 products, Nurofen migraine pain, Nurofen tension headache, Nurofen period pain and Nurofen back pain, deliberately deceived and misled customers. Each claimed to target specific pain when in fact they all contained the same amount of the same active ingredient, ibuprofen lysine. The ACCC's chairman is Rod Sims.
We, of course, welcome the earlier finding that what they did was against the law in selling the Nurofen product that way. We now welcome the fact that they will be required to pay a penalty.
The penalty of $1.7 million to be paid to the Commonwealth is significantly less than the $6 million the ACCC had been seeking. It's closer to the $1.1 million Reckitt Benckiser had suggested as appropriate.
We're considering the judgment, and we'll obviously have to reflect and decide how we come out ourselves on this and what we'll now do, considering the judgment and considering if there's any further courses of action we can take.
Is there the possibility that you'll appeal this penalty?
Well, that's something we'll have to consider. We certainly give detailed consideration to these judgments. We obviously greatly respect the court. We'll need to take a bit of time to do that, and I'll be seeking advice internally from a range of people as to what the best step is.
In a statement, Reckitt Benckiser said,
Nurofen did not intend to mislead consumers. However, we recognise that we could have done more to assist our consumers in navigating the Nurofen-specific pain range. That is, to show that each of the products in the range is equally effective for the other pains indicated on the Nurofen-specific pain range packaging.
This fine may turn out to be the tip of the iceberg for Reckitt Benckiser. A class action against the company over these products started earlier this month. If successful, millions of Australians may be able to claim a refund on the specific pain painkillers.
The report from ABC, fascinating case that clearly the intention was, well, the effect was to absolutely deceive. A New Plymouth cafe owner is asking for compensation from Port Taranaki because a paid parking trial at the Lee Breakwater has left her out of pocket. Barbara Olsen-Henderson says the 5-month trial has cost her cafe Batch on Breakwater thousands of dollars in lost revenue, and she's been unable to afford to replace staff. Our Taranaki reporter Robin Martin has more.
Barbara Olsen-Henderson set up the Batch on Breakwater almost 10 years ago. She says the paid parking trial has been a disaster for the business, which could not afford to replace the last 2 staff members who left.
We check our turnover figures, comparing them with the same period of previous year every week, and up until December our figures were actually running average 14% ahead of last year. Suddenly they're running anywhere between 6 and 30% below it.
Ms Olsen-Henderson says she's not against paid parking per se, but the system is too difficult to understand.
We built this with a big car park there that fishermen can use, and they did use it, and we just kind of fit it in. It's all I've known. I don't really have a problem with people having to pay to park. I don't think it's really unfair. What I think is unfair is that it's difficult to pay, people don't understand the system, and they're getting fined. I think it should be much clearer.
The colour-coded parking area includes 38 dedicated car parks, 76 boat trailer parks and a further 38 shared parks. And there are another 240 free parks on nearby Port Taranaki land. Car parking costs $1 an hour, while fishers and marine users pay $8 a month. Charges apply 24 hours a day, and infringements will cost you $40. The Port's Chief Executive Guy Roper says paid parking is necessary to control an increasingly busy area.
Cars were parking in spaces that were long enough to accommodate a boat and a trailer, and then there are others, boats for example, parking across car parks and other areas. So getting clarity around where the parking should be undertaken and with what group of user, that's provided us with a greater degree of control.
Mr Roper says he doesn't believe the Batch's financial woes are due to the parking changes alone.
There are a number of factors. The Taranaki economy is going through a bit of a tougher time. We understand that she has also changed some of her opening hours. But we've worked very closely with Barbara since we mooted the trial. And she has indicated to me that with the changes that we've made, there weren't too many problems.
Out in the Breakwater car park, there are mixed views on the introduction of paid parking. Regular Port user Chris Powell has no problem with it.
I'm reasonably happy with them. I think it works all right. It's certainly made these parks here, the commercial user parks, where at least we can get one now. And I think user pays. We all got a facility that we're using. So anywhere else you go in the country, you pay.
Young mother Tracy Reid, who was out for a coffee with her mate Tina Dove, is less enthusiastic.
I think it's pretty unfair, really, especially for people like us that have children, and it's just an added cost to come into town already. So, I mean, we've parked right in town by the Windwand and we've walked here today.
Neville Hunger is suspicious of the port's motives.
I'm not agreeable to it. It's a bit of a hassle
having to do it. It has always been free, and so it's just another revenue gathering exercise, I guess.
While Fisher Murray Wegman can't understand why the charges apply 24/7.
Yeah, well, I reckon it sucks. Because, you know, we come down late at night and you even have to pay charges at night time sort of thing. You know, me and the wife come down, we just park up around on the wharf. Yeah, that kind of things.
Port Taranaki will host a public meeting on the parking issue on May the 4th. For Checkpoint, Robin Martin.
24 minutes past 6. The week is coming to an end. Coming up on World Watch PM at 6:30 with Elizabeth Brown tonight. The situation in the Syrian city of Aleppo is described as catastrophic. That's one word for it. Heartbreaking, tragic, appalling. And the American county with a knack for picking presidents. That's coming up in 5.5 minutes. An Australian mother has turned to social media to try to find the father of her daughter more than 13 years after she was conceived in Queenstown. Karen Lee was working in a restaurant in 2002 in Queenstown when she met a fellow Australian, Rodney, on the Queenstown waterfront. Rodney was visiting with 3 days to go snowboarding with 2 friends. And as can happen with flings, Karen Lee told me she didn't think the one night they spent together would lead to anything more.
I never thought to ask him his last name, of course. And my daughter used to say to me when she was little, you know, Mummy, why didn't you get his phone number? Or, Mummy, why didn't you get a photo of him? And I said, love, I didn't know you were in my belly. So, you know, I just didn't know.
Okay, so he's an Australian. Did he tell you where he was from?
Surfers Paradise, yeah. So we had a little bit of information. He also showed me a photograph of his daughter, who was about 2, and he was quite sad because he'd just separated from his partner, and he was, you know, feeling a little bit sad. So I'd just gone through a separation as well, and that's why I ended up in Queenstown. So I was feeling a bit sad. So, yeah, and he was with one of the guys was called John, and as far as we know, he worked in a box factory or a cardboard box factory or something. That's about it.
Okay, so roughly what age do you think he was?
Look, I think he was about 5 years younger than me. And I'm going to have to give my age away now, aren't I? Which is fine. So I'm 52 now, so he would be late 40s, I imagine.
Okay, so we're looking for a guy called Rodney, late 40s, who was, at least at that time, somewhere around Surfers Paradise, who has a mate called John, who went on a holiday in Queenstown. What ethnicity was he? Was he a Caucasian fellow?
Yes, he was Caucasian, a fair, really quite fair complexion. Hair, shoulder length, you know, curly, scruffy, surfy looking, maybe even slightly ginger hair, and he would have been about 5'7" to 5'9". You can work that out in centimetres. And he's very fit. And that's
it. Wow. Okay. So what sort of response have you had? We heard about this through the ABC in Australia. So since you went hunting for Rodney, what sort of response have you had?
Well, look, I put it on Facebook the other day, and I hadn't told anybody. Like, all my family are still in New Zealand. I've got my one sister here, but all my family are in New Zealand. And I talked to my mum, but I didn't tell Mum. I didn't tell my sister. A friend of mine was over here, and I was just telling her the story of Emmy and his dad and how it came about. And she said, "That's just so beautiful, Karen." She said, "Why don't you look for him?" And I went, "How can I look for this guy? I didn't know his first name." And she said, "Well, you know, the social media now is pretty, you know, good. Why don't you just give it a go?" And I just went, yeah. But anyway, that afternoon I did. And I asked 3 friends in Queensland to share for me. And I don't know what it's up to now, but last I heard it was 15,000 shares.
Holy moly. So if Rodney's out there, sooner or later, he's going to stumble upon this, isn't it? I guess. Yeah, and this is.
Someone will know him.
And this is a kind of sad. Because at the moment the conversation is full of possibility, but I guess there's also a possibility that Rodney's life has gone on and he's kind of sitting there with his head down thinking, oh, goodness gracious, I don't know if I'm, you know, ready for this.
No, look, if I was Rodney, I have to be honest, I'd be hiding. I didn't expect this publicity. Honestly, I feel for him. I really, really do. I did not expect this. And so I can imagine, once this dies down a bit, he may want to contact us later. He hasn't. This way, he knows he has a daughter. There's nothing. We don't want anything from Rodney. I certainly don't. My daughter would like a photo. But, I just hope that he's a nice guy, and then it just leaves the possibility for him to contact her later.
Yeah, I think that's a nice possibility. Tell me about your daughter. Is she a fantastic kid?
She is. Yeah, she's beautiful. She's a very beautiful girl. She's, what do I say? And every mum thinks their daughters are wonderful.
Yeah.
But yeah, she's a lovely girl.
So Rodney would be very proud of her if he met her, right?
I'm sure he would be very proud of her. But, as I say, we're not expecting anything. And it was never about that. And I just thought it was going to be very quietly put out there and something might happen.
Yeah. Good luck, Kieran Lee. It's lovely to talk to you. And I hope at some stage, when he's ready, Rodney turns up.
All right. Thank you for spreading the word.
Kieran Lee speaking from Perth. That brings Checkpoint to an end for the week. Thank you for being with us. We will be back on Monday night at 5 o'clock. Hope to see you then.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The police in Northland have arrested a 40-year-old local man in relation to a violent attack on and abduction of a young woman jogger who remains in hospital in a serious condition. The Overseas Investment Office is investigating after revelations two Argentinian brothers that allowed to buy a large Taranaki farm have criminal convictions for environmental pollution. Some Christchurch homeowners are challenging the Earthquake Commission on its insistence it always repaired to an as-when-new standard. An Iranian refugee who suffered severe burns after setting himself alight on Nauru in front of visiting UN officials has died. The Refugee Council says the government should push Australia to accept the offer to resettle up to 300 refugees from the Manus Island Detention Centre, which is closing. And the Waikato District Health Board says hospital patients may have been exposed to measles by a staff